Your knowledge of contract language is imperative.
You must know what a violation looks like if you wish to be active in its cessation.
It is important to understand that being active and knowledgeable affects your overall bargaining strength.
Together, we can forge a more militant NALC.
Good morning, letter carriers, and welcome back to Parcels of Knowledge, the podcast dedicated to delivering knowledge to the city letter carrier with your host, the Roseville Wrecking Ball, currently on grievance number 422 for the year. Today, I'm going back to my roots as an educator and doing a short episode on building a better case file, so this will be mostly focused on stewards, but if you carriers want to listen to it just to see what goes on and how we build a better case file, feel free to take a listen. As a steward, you should always have your ears and eyes open on the workroom floor. Many times you may learn of a contractual violation just by paying attention to your surroundings. This is something I referred to in prior episodes as the duty of bearing witness. And it's one of the most important duties, whether you're a steward or not. One prime example would be, for example, if you're doing a case on Article 8 and you get the everything report, you can also accidentally stumble upon other information, and this is very valid. Like maybe you noticed your coworker got punched out early for the day, and make sure you take those anomalies and investigate them. That's a very particular example for stewards, but you can also just simply keep your ears out on the workroom floor and hear things or see things that are unusual. You have the right to investigate those things, and I think that's important that we do, because only sometimes will a carrier request steward time and tell you their issue. I've gone over M documents that tell you that has to be done by the end of the day. Make sure you remember that as well. But this represents maybe 20% of my cases. Most of my cases are developed simply from what we see and hear on the workroom floor. Now, after you either listen to the carrier or after you investigate what you've seen or heard, you have the right to determine whether or not it rises to the level of a grievance. As a steward, you want to build your case file so you can negotiate from a place of strength in your first grievance meeting or in any grievance meeting. As the steward investigating the grievance, you'll be building the case file for a Formal A representative at the next level. Or, if you're a Formal A, you'll be building it for Step B, or if it goes further, the arbitration advocate and the arbitrator. Your work is the foundation of the entire case file. Everyone that follows will be relying on what you did or did not put into that case file. So the pressure's on you, pal. Never assume that anyone who is looking at your case file knows anything about the facts of your grievance. This is a very common theme that might happen because it's reasonable. You might think that, I know Tony at Step B. He's going to understand this, but it doesn't matter. They can only rely on the facts in the case file. Always prepare every case file as if the case is going all the way to arbitration, even if you think the grievance will be settled at your level. This is sort of disputed by some branches who will tell you maybe you shouldn't make contentions at Informal A. They may take the Informal A's contentions out at Formal A, which is fine, but I think it's your duty to at least provide them with the contentions, not just an empty case file with just a couple pieces of paper, which sometimes happens. Having the right information is more important than the amount of information. And in order for a grievance to have the best chance of success, stewards should be able to answer yes to each of the following 5 questions. 1. Is there a violation of the national agreement? And of course that incorporates all handbooks and manuals under Article 19 and the law under Article 5 and 3. 2. Did we properly frame the issue? 3. Did we determine all facts of the case and document each one? Remember, each fact that you talk about needs to be documented very well. 4. Do your contentions clearly explain the documented facts and how the national agreement was violated? And 5. Did we request an appropriate remedy for the contract violation, which I will be going over how to formulate an appropriate remedy later on. What skills do we need or use when developing a good case file? Now just remember, you got to have a few different skills, and because you are a steward at this branch, whatever branch you may be at, likely you already have these skills because there's a reason why people chose you. But if you don't, maybe you should choose to try and develop them. The main skills you might need is time management, organization, the ability to tell the story in a way that gets the reader engaged, and you need to be able to use those three tools to prove the violation at hand. Every case file should have at the bare minimum a PS Form 8190, a steward certification. Make sure you prove your certification. That's the worst way to lose a case. Request for steward time, request for information, informal meeting notes. If necessary, a time extension, make sure that is in writing, and relevant contractual language. Information to include in a case file is heavily influenced on the subject of the grievance. I will go over some examples. The following checklists are suggestions. They're not meant to be all-inclusive. You should always be able to back up any contention you make with documentary evidence. So, for example, if you have an Article 8 case, some of the questions you might be wanting to answer is, who was scheduled on what route? Who should have worked the overtime? Who should have not worked the overtime? Did the carrier inform management that they would not return in 8 hours? Who is on the 8-hour, the 10-hour, and the 12-hour list? And to show who the grievance payout should go to. Proper documentation you might want to include is the daily schedule for the date of violation, the everything report for all carriers including CCAs and PTFs, all submitted PS Form 3996s, a copy of the overtime sign-up list for that quarter, and overtime balance sheet for work location. If you're doing a discipline case on attendance, some of the questions you might want to answer is, when was the investigative interview? When was the discipline issued? Was there any leave requested, and what type? Are there any cited dates of FMLA protection? Has management had prior discussions or reviews with the grievant regarding attendance, and if so, when? Some of the documentation you might want to include is a copy of the disciplinary letter, any prior active discipline quoted in the charge letter, PS Form 3972s for current and previous year for the grievant, PS Form 3971s for dates quoted in the charge letter, and steward and management investigatory interview notes. For discipline for unauthorized overtime, some of the questions you might want to answer is, did management use DOIS numbers to hold the grievant to return time? Did grievant inform management of their inability to return in 8 hours? Did management instruct the grievant to carry all the mail? Maybe you want to include a copy of the discipline letter, all submitted PS Form 3996s, management and union investigatory notes, any prior active discipline quoted in the charge letter, a grievance statement, and M document 326 and 1769. If your case is maybe about deems desirable. Some of the questions you wanted to answer is, does the grievant have a bad attendance record? And did management act arbitrary and capricious when they placed the grievant on deems desirable? Some of the documentation you might need is a statement from the grievant, PS Form 3972 for the grievant for current and previous year, tax everything report for grievant for dates deemed desirable, written notice management provided to the grievant placing him or her on a restricted sick leave, interview with management as to why they placed the grievant on deemed desirable. If your case is a ODL equitability case, some of the questions you might want to answer are, what are the final overtime totals for the quarter for carriers on the list? Were there any carriers who were not equitable? Were there makeup opportunities for this quarter? Some of the documentation you might need are overtime equitability spreadsheets for the quarter, overtime alert reports for all pay periods in the quarter, ODL sign-up sheet, carrier statements, settlements from any previous quarters if applicable. If this is for emergency placement, some of the questions you might want to answer are, does the emergency placement meet the criteria outlined in Article 16.7? Did management issue a notice of written charges timely? And how long has the carrier been on emergency placement? Some of the documentations you might want are written charge letters, carrier statements, management interview, Or maybe even C-101-46, which is referenced in the Article 16.7. If this is for maybe a Weingarten violation, which is when you ask for representation and they choose not to give it to you, some of the questions you might want to answer are, were the grievance Weingarten rights violated? Were the stewards Weingarten rights violated? And was discipline issued to the grievant? And some of the documentation you might need are statement from the grievant, statement from the steward, M1789, M1096, and M1667, and investigation interview notes. If it's for failure to provide steward time, some of the questions you might want to answer are, how many times did the steward request union time and when? How much time did the steward spend off the clock working on the grievance? And how much time management could have provided? Some of the documentation you can provide are written requests for steward time to management, management denial of time in writing or by interview, steward statement, steward's documentation timeline of work performed off the clock, and incident date of grievance steward was working on. So, I could keep going on, but that's just some examples, and they're the bare minimum you should make sure you're doing when it comes to questions to be answered and documentation to be provided. Of course, you should take this and make it your own. Decide your own questions that are relevant to the situation, and just make sure that you have that other side of the question where you ask the question. Now you need to provide documentation to whatever answer that you determined is the answer. You should have access to all this information because Article 31 allows this. It reads as follows. The employee will make available for inspection by the union all relevant information necessary for collective bargaining or the enforcement, administration, or interpretation of this agreement, including information necessary to determine whether to file or to continue the processing of a grievance under this agreement. Upon request of the union, the employer will furnish such information provided. However, that employer may require the union to reimburse the USPS for any costs reasonably incurred in obtaining this information. Some examples of this information, straight out of Article 31, are attendance records, payroll records, documents in an employee's personnel file, internal USPS instructions and memorandums, disciplinary records, route inspection records, patron complaints, the handbooks and manuals, photographs, reports and studies, seniority lists, overtime desired and work assignment lists, bidding records, wage and salary records, training manuals, postal inspection service investigative memoranda, and OIG reports. In order to prevail in a grievance, it is vitally important that the request for information be in writing. That way we can prove it. Even better, send it by email, because if you did, you'll have a timestamp and you'll have the people who received it. But if you don't have fancy things in your office, which many of us don't, well then at least write down in a section on that request who you are handing that request to. Also, make sure you note on each request the date and time, and make sure you sign those things. Contractually, a request could be verbal. However, how do you prove you requested it then? Make sure we put these things in writing and make sure we're doing them the right way. We need to build a better case file. Regardless of the way the system is fair or not fair, you need to think of it as, not is this what I should be doing in order to get this result. It's more so, what do I need to do within the system that I have? Later on you can think about changing the system, but right now you need to focus on building the best case file with the tools you have available. Ultimately, your goal here when you create your contentions is to ask who, what, when, where, and why, and then prove them. Once you have all the needed documentation and information, make sure you prepare your contentions. As a steward, you know more about the issue than anyone who may be meeting at the next level, so make sure you're telling your story appropriately. Who allegedly did it? Who violated the contract? What did he or she do? Where did it happen? When did it occur? And why did it happen? Make sure you ask all those questions and then prove them. the decision is going to be based on the facts, circumstances. It's based on the contract. It's a result of applying the JCAM to the facts. And when they make a decision, it's usually for learning or understanding. And make compliance a habit so that we can prevent future disputes. And there's a distinction between facts and contentions. You need to know that. Facts, they tell a story. Contentions explain what the story means. So facts are the who, what, when, and where of a grievance, but not necessarily the why. Facts are something that can be proven by evidence. Facts tell what happened. Contentions, on the other hand, they are an argument, assertion, belief, claim, opinion, or line of reasoning. They are how the writer interprets certain facts in the light of certain rules. What certain rules say about the facts of a case. So facts plus rules equals contentions. A rule should be cited and quoted as the basis for each contention. Many stewards have difficulty distinguishing between a fact and a contention. In essence, a contention is how you interpret certain facts in the light of certain rules, or, in the case of a grievance, what you conclude when you apply the contract to what happened. For example, a fact would be, the contract supports that people will not be improperly mandated. It usually would be very more specific to the contract language, but I'm just going to paraphrase and say that the facts are people need to be maximized on the ODL prior to non-ODL being mandated. Now, a contention would be that because in light of the fact that a non-ODL shouldn't be mandated prior to the ODL being maximized, what we have before us is, on this particular date, a non-ODL was forced while an ODL was not maximized. That would be your contention, that this was in violation of the prior cited fact. In order to carry the burden of proof, the union must be prepared to provide documentary evidence for each fact or contention made in a grievance. There is a pretty handy burden of proof worksheet that I will likely be posting on the Parcels of Knowledge Facebook page. If you don't already, go ahead and click and follow that. And this thing, you just list the relevant facts and contentions in the left column. And in the right column, you list the corresponding evidence that proves that fact or contention. It's just a simple thing steward can go over to ensure that every single fact or contention is proven with cold, hard evidence. Now, one thing I'd like to make you aware of is that if you're using M documents, be careful, because some M number documents are postal policy letters or instruction to management, which means that they're not binding agreements. Usually they have one signature. They prefer that you don't use these in your issue statement. Like I said, we got to work within our system. I think it's unfair, but hey, if it makes for a better case file, that's what you need to be going for. Better case files are what we are here to prepare for. Instead, use them in your contentions for persuasive value. A perfect example would be M1517, which is a great document to cite. But you can't be citing it if it's simply one signature, which means that not both parties have negotiated it together. An alternative for 1517, which is typically used for non-compliance, can possibly be 1492. There's always an alternative document out there, almost every time. So talk to people that you know, including myself if you'd like, to ask for alternative documents if the one you've been using might not be as citable as it could be. Your grievance is also probably not the first time an issue has been seen or decided. Make sure you're looking in your local archives for prior settlements on the issue to formulate a proper remedy. This will oftentimes determine the precedent set by whatever, your local decided in the past. Also, I'd like to talk about formulating an appropriate remedy for the violation, because that is part of the case file. Formulating an appropriate remedy for a violation of the letter carrier contract has been a work of art for years. There's been blunders that I have observed in our local recorded past and blunders that I have had myself. Set forth would be my basics for how a decent steward should formulate appropriate remedies. Appropriate remedies must include the following. 1. Any confirmed violation of the contract must be remedied with a stop language, such as but not limited to cease and desist, which is the preferable language in my opinion. If management refuses to sign a cease and desist, there are alternatives that are acceptable. This is debatable. Either way, it must include some sort of stop language. This is important, as a monetary make-whole remedy on its own isn't fixing the situation. We need a commitment by management to stop violating things of that nature. For example, if you file a grievance for observation forms, and you cite the ELM as well as the form under Article 19, but also prior settlements under Article 15, and the violation had been confirmed, we need a commitment from management not to violate each and every one of those in the future. It would be unwise for your remedy to only address Article 19, but not the rest. Number 2, a make-whole remedy for anyone that was harmed, such as but not limited to a monetary remedy for a missed opportunity. Number 3, if a monetary remedy is awarded, you must enter a sunset clause, which means that you need to ask management for a date in which they will agree to pay this. My current standard is that they must input the payment and give the steward receipt within 30 days of the settlement date. And number 4, if a monetary remedy is awarded, you must record on the settlement the lump sum of the payment, the amount of hours it is for, if there is hours to be cited, the carrier's EIN. I find that the easiest way to do it. And I normally say pay as charted below. You'll see that a lot of times with Step E, and just do 4 columns. The carrier, the EIN, the hours, the lump sum. The reason why this is necessary to help us process an account for audits. This makes it more efficient and gives management easier access to paying out remedies faster. Now, of course, management doesn't need a break. But in order for us to make it easier for management, we are also building a better case file. And this is exactly what this episode's about, building a better case file. It's not about what's fair. It's about what will help me build a better case file. We input the EIN simply because if we do not, management must look up each carrier's EIN when inputting into GATS. We account for the hours so that when management audits us, our information is already forthcoming, and so that we can account for overtime desire list impacts. We account for the lump sum so we can ensure that our financial accounts are up to date, and so that the carrier can rightfully understand the impact this will have on their check, and thus so will also understand if they had received it in full. That's all I got to say about formulating appropriate remedies. If you make something that is a little bit over the top, just know that anyone deciding at the above level may take you less seriously. So you got to just make sure that it kind of falls in line with what you've already asked for in the past. And then if it's time for an escalation because you have an overwhelming amount of history here, then escalate it appropriately, not go from $25 to $2,500 for something that's very simple. Now, before you button your case file up, ask yourself some questions. What is the big picture of the case? Are all the pieces relevant? Are there any missing pieces? A lot of times I'll use a support network of people to help bounce ideas off and figure this out because multiple sets of eyes on this case might be a good thing. You got to ask, did we properly frame the issue? Did we prove the violation happened? Do we have contractual proof? Do we include all the supporting documentation? And are we asking for the appropriate remedy? Ensure that your case file includes a letter of appeal, PS Form 8190, table of contents, attachments to the PS Form 8190, like if you put C attached, because a lot of times those boxes are not big enough to put what we need to say. Any triggering documents, documentary evidence, investigatory notes, contractual cites, prior settlements or decisions on similar issues, and anything else that's miscellaneous. Just remember, some of the most common mistakes when building a case file is people will often put no table of contents. That's not very good. Make sure you also number every page. And this is more so for Step B appeals. PS Form 8190 needs to be filled out completely, signed and dated. Make sure that a lot of times the most common mistake also is that you lack documentary evidence. This can be used against you in higher levels because they can say, well, if the informal A management partner had this information, they could have settled it. It could have changed their mind and they could have settled it at the lowest level, but they did not. So this should be remanded. And sometimes that will be taken as a very reasonable argument. We all know it's not, but whatever. It doesn't matter what you contend. It matters what you can prove. That's going to be a guiding principle throughout your whole career as a steward. Make sure your documents included are explained in your contentions. You have to have contentions that say, hey, because this is what happened on this particular day, and then in parentheses I usually put see page 32, and that would be the tax report for that particular day. Don't include documents that have nothing to do with your grievance. That's going to be a big deal. Include only one copy of a document. Don't put 32 copies of Article 15 in there, because whoever's deciding your case probably won't appreciate that. They don't want to have to go through a lot of stuff that's unnecessary. Always include the original documents. Here's 3 golden rules that need to always be applied. No staples. No paper clips. No double-sided documents. Absolutely not. I tell my new stewards here, those 3 things, let the devil in your own house, because that is absolutely inappropriate, because when you send those cases up, they got to undo all those things. Whether it's double-sided documents, paper clips, or staples, it's unnecessary. I hate that. It's just one of those pet peeves of mine. I know it's a little bit extreme, but absolutely not. Make sure your notes are retyped if they're not legible. All documents in the file should be the standard paper size. Make sure pictures and copies are legible. Do not use nicknames. One of the most common mistakes is postal jargon. They assume that because they're sending it up within the postal system that they're going to understand what a T6 means instead of a carrier technician. They assume that anyone's going to understand what these things are that have many different names. Like pumpkins, people call those things different things in different regions. Well, an arbitrator who has no postal background, they're not going to know what the hell a pumpkin is or any of the other things. Make sure postal jargon is elaborated or not included whatsoever. And finally, statements must be signed if included in the case file. Without a signature or a date, those statements are almost useless. One other thing I'd like to cover before I let you go, because I'm basically done here, is I want to make sure, I was taught this a long time ago by David Mudd. I used to I was brand new, and I made weekly overtime grievances for improper mandation. In fact, I was so crazy, I would include things like all Article 8 violations within the week in one settlement, in one case. And when I was talking to David Mudd about something unrelated to that particular thing, but it had to do with Article 8, he asked, why are you doing that? And I said, well, I mean, they don't give me enough time, so I need to make sure I put it all together. And he said, that's nonsense, because it's going to hurt you in the long run. And the way he explained it is, and I really have taken this to heart. This is the one thing I've ever heard from him that was the most important thing that's ever mattered. He explained that when you build your case file, you need to break it down to its most simplest form, its most simplest element, which means, for example, the facts of a week is going to be much more difficult than explaining the facts of a day. If you can build a daily violation, you will receive a lot easier burden of proof at arbitration, including, a lot of arbitrators, they might not say that I'm going to give partial remedies. They're going to say yes or no sometimes. So breaking it down by day, by its most simplest form, will always be the best way to do it. It may take more time, but management has to give you that time, and that's a very important thing to remember. Back then, I was barely getting any time. It's a long, hard road to being able to get the time to build a case file properly, but it's us who determines how to build that case file. We're the moving party of the case file. So what he told me back then was very important. And I've used it ever since, because not only does it help with make sure to proving your burden is a lot easier, it also helps with the fact that you can build a lot more settlements, and something can be taken a lot more seriously, because if something's violated 7 times a week, instead of getting one settlement that's a weekly settlement, you can build 7 settlements, and management will agree 7 times to stop violating, and of course, you know how management is. They will still be violating. Now, my final thoughts are, if you have done your research and followed the suggestions, you have learned you have a much better chance of being successful with your grievance outside of anomalies. Now, hopefully, you have learned something valuable today. And as always, I hope you have a good day.
Brothers and sisters, this guy is good, man. He's fucking good.
And my boy Joshua, he killed it. Man, he's lockstep right now. He's killing it.